So, good afternoon, everyone. Thanks for the warm words, and you used exactly the right buzzwords to get started for my presentation, as if we've discussed that before. Great. So, to briefly again introduce myself, my name is Sebastian Steinbuss. I'm working with International Data Spaces Association. I'm lead architect and CTO in the International Data Spaces Association. I'll tell you in a bit how long I've been doing that. I'm also working in the open source field, Eclipse Data Space Components, Eclipse Data Space Working Group, where we do a lot of fundamental work to actually build data spaces and to support all of you to connect to data spaces. I'm also very active in the standardization field, building international standards, so International Data Spaces Association. It's not only connecting Europe, it's connecting really internationally to share data across borders. So we're doing international standards, but also European standards, and I'll come to that in a bit. So, I reused the slide, and I'll tell you in a bit why. This slide is roughly 10 years old, 9.5 years, something like this. And we have some good buzzwords on that slide. So we talk about innovation based on data. AI requires data and data ecosystems. Well, 2026, everyone's talking about AI. We've been doing this for 10 years. We talk about data ecosystems, data sharing ecosystem that really need data and need data sharing. We talk about semantic interoperability, linked data as a very important measure to not only share data on a semantic understanding, but also to connect it to each other, to come up with a comprehensive picture of things. For example, a battery passport, a digital product passport, and all those other cool stuffs. All those things requires data sharing, trusted data sharing. With this nice slogan, I still love that data sharing is better than playing alone. I think that's exactly the thing that we need to do. So, why did I come up with that slide that is nearly 10 years old? Because IDSA turns 10 last Monday. So yesterday we turned 10. So not only 5-6 years, we're doing this for 10 years. We started off from a research project named Industrial Data Space in Germany, funded by the German ministries and executed by Fraunhofer, with the idea, well, that's nothing that we can do alone in research, to tackle all those different aspects and challenges that we have in the various fields and sectors when we talk about data sharing and trusted data sharing. But I promised to bring also some international perspectives. As said, 10 years ago, starting off in Germany, with a lot of German speakers, we have one colleague from TNO that was the first international person that we had in our working group meetings. It's Matthias Punter, to whom know him. And so he is very fluent in German, so he was able to follow us. In the meantime, data spaces is not only a European topic anymore. So this is taken from the data spaces radar, where we try to keep track of where data spaces developing and building at the moment. So you see it's really an international topic. We have some hotspots. Of course, Europe is really the melting pot for data spaces, where we've been doing a lot of research and industrial development on data spaces. But not only Europe. So we have really a very strong commitment also in Asia. Japan is following those developments very strongly, together with the developments on Society 4.0. We have Korea very active. China plans to build 100 data spaces in the next couple of years. And so what is said about China, if they decide to do something, they will do, and they are doing that. So they are building Chinese data spaces to support their local industry, their research, their developments, but also for cross-border data sharing, so to connect Chinese industries with other regions of the world and vice versa. So this is very active. Australia is a very active development of data spaces at the moment, with slightly different perspective on the matter when it comes from the perspective, why do I need a data sovereignty, why do I need data spaces, but actually a different motivation, but they need it and they implement it. We are in the US and the Latin Americas. They are also very strong in developments. A lot of new regulations are upcoming, and a lot of new development programs and research programs are upcoming there, and including Africa. Honestly, I have no clue about that bubble in South Africa, where that comes from. I know most of the data spaces, no clue about that one. What we also see, it was a strong starting point coming from manufacturing, but it's not limited to a single sector anymore. Various sectors and various domains approach data spaces, data sharing, also taking into account that you're typically not only sharing data in a single sector, that you need to do something cross-sectorial. If you are a car maker, maybe you're also a logistics company, maybe you're also an insurance company or a bank. So you need to connect to various different sectors and domains. And we see that happening, that of course manufacturing, Industry 4.0 is still a strong player, but also other fields, including open and agile smart cities. What I find super interesting is about the business case patterns. Most data spaces still focus on innovation. Well, that's maybe also part of the answer why it takes so long. Innovation is a lot of cool and great ideas. Not all of them materialize, but we learn a lot from those innovation ones. But we also see other business models. And coming to your last point that you addressed, you see on the right side, development stage. Most of the data spaces feel they are implementing. They are not operational, fully flying, but implementing stuff. Some are in the ideation phase, building things up, building a community that you need to get things started, but most of them are really implementing and trying to get things started. So this is a little bit what I see on the international level, starting off in Europe and being really an international approach at the moment on data spaces, on data sharing. But why is that the case? I think there are two very important drivers that we have, and this is, I love that slide, my everlasting and epic fight between humans and machines, because we have two very important topics that are driving data space at the moment. AI as a relatively new, real hype topic, where data is required as fuel, but also the topic of data governance, and especially data governance in such multilateral environments, where we have multiple organizations that want to organize with each other, that wish to share data with each other, taking into account the different levels of policies, including jurisdictions, regulations. So we have a European data regulation, for example, but if you wish to exchange data inside Europe, well, it's pretty clear. If you want to exchange it with other regions of the world, under other jurisdictions, you need to take that into account. And therefore, there's one very important aspect that I would like to bring to you today. This is exactly this difference between what does a humans do and what can a machine do. And especially in data governance is really about humans taking decisions, while data management is talking about, well, what can a machine automatically do? Especially when we talk about AI, trust is a very important aspect, and trust is an important driver for data spaces as well. But trust is understood, especially in the field of AI, as a human decision. Do I trust this output, or do I not trust this output? And sometimes, well, you shouldn't trust AI output. And sometimes you should. On the other hand side, we talk about trustworthiness, which is really the thing that you can measure. I like to say it's my bag of evidences. So I have some evidences in my bag that I can show you to prove you, well, you can trust me. Simplest example is if I step into a taxi, well, maybe I'll ask for a driver's license. So that is an evidence that proves that person can drive a car. If I trust that person to drive me somewhere, that's a different decision to take. So in data spaces, we are a little bit between those lines, between trust and trustworthiness, between data governance and data management, because we talk a lot about this automatic reconciliation of policies and claims. I have a request. If you wish to use my data, you need to bring me some evidences. And then I want to automatically match and agree, or if I wish to share data or not. So in general, we can say that it's a question of perspective when we talk about both topics, data governance and AI. Data governance on the one hand side, really taking a look at the input side, so how to deal with the data, how the data input can be structured, can be well organized. On the other hand side, the trust in the AI, this is really focusing on the output. Is the output good enough? Can it be reliable? Can I use that in my organizational context? So how do I get this slope to data spaces back? So data governance is an important discipline in data spaces. At the moment we discussed that, well, data spaces is a little bit of everything. You mentioned this. So everything calls itself a data space at the moment. So what is really a true data space or not? And we see that we need to distinguish between a couple of facets to talk with the right persons, to talk about the right level of abstraction. We talk about a legal and governance facet, where you enforce rights, obligations, you ask for regulatory compliance, you ask for a common rule set in a data space, a so-called rule books, where we also have a lot of legal roles, especially in the European context. And that's something differently than the facet in the middle, which talks about economic facets. Sometimes we say it's an operational facet or a business facet. It's a little bit tricky here because data spaces are so different. We started off with the idea, well, it's a business facet, but what if I talk about a healthcare data space? Would you feel confident if someone says, I'm making business with your health? Personally, I don't. And I also don't want to treat it as a product from a medical doctor. So this is why we are struggling with the naming. Economic is quite good. So healthcare is a good example here. Also, if we talk about cultural heritage data spaces, for example, it's our cultural heritage. Like the dikes that we have here in the Netherlands. That's part of cultural heritage. And it's owned by the society. So this is why it's a little bit tricky, but it's important to understand what are the requirements, what are the business models, and what are the funding models in that facet, and what are the key stakeholders here. And then finally we talk about the technical facet. By education, I'm a computer scientist, so this is where I feel at home in the technical facet, where we really talk about data space participants, connectors, participant agents that connect to each other and can do something with each other. So if we put that in a picture, we come up with something like this. That we really have the idea that we have participants in the data space, so someone who is following an overarching governance scheme, following some rules that are given, of course, act lawful, but we also talk about a common governance between the different participants. And you agree to that. That is what the data space is about. It enables trusted data sharing between the participants. We talk about the interaction between the different parties, where we talk about catalog functionalities. So we want to have dynamic and resilient data supply chains. So something like catalog or discoverability functionalities needs to be there. And we talk about the negotiation of data sharing agreements, about contracts. So what are the rules that we agree on as organizations to exchange data with each other? And then we need some supporting services, facilitating services for that. Of course, something like identities, or in general, claims. Like the driver's license, I can provide a claim. I'm Sebastian, I'm working with IDSA, I have an ISO whatever certification. All those claims need to be exchanged in a really scalable and in best case decentralized way. So we need something like a facilitating service for that. Sometimes we need observability. A third party or a second party observes the interactions between participants for a good reasons. Well, because I don't trust you, that might be a good reason, and I want to have a third party supervising us. Or because there are regulations that just ask, you need to provide some evidence on stuff. And then we need other facilitating services, like vocabulary services. A simple example, if we need a common semantic for the data set, well, where do I find that? Where do I find this repository of standards, of ontologies, of whatever that I can use for my data sharing? This is a little bit the overview. And I would like to ask for your attention on the definition that we agreed on. In Europe and on international, what a data space actually is. It just took us 10 years to get there, to come up with an agreed definition. And it's still complex enough. So it's an environment. What is the first tricky thing? Please translate environment to a Japanese guy and explain what an environment is. Enable trusted data sharing. And this is really the most important value proposition. It's about trusted data sharing between participating parties. Sorry for the standardization language here. So we talk about participants, and the party has a very clear meaning that it could be an entity, an organization, or something else. So, but it's a participant in a data space, so following the common rules, the common rule books. Based on an agreed governance framework, what is a rule book, along with an agreed set of policies, semantic models, standardized protocols, processes, and facilitating services. Well, that is it in general, what a data space is. So, all clear, I can close my computer and head home. So, no, let's continue on that a little bit. So when we talk about trusted data sharing, there is, as I said, that's the most important value proposition for me as an organization to join a data space. Some people will build data spaces, we have a common set of rules and some services that support us, but what's in for me? What I want to achieve as an organization is not only data sharing, that's easy enough. Pull up a web server, provide an API, off you go, data sharing and data exchange is easy. But for trusted data spaces, data sharing, we talk about interoperability in a dynamic manner. I can switch my data providers or consumers easily. I want to enable my organizational autonomy and agency. So I want to decide who gets my data or who doesn't get my data in the end. Of course, maybe not in a fully regulated industry, where we talk, for example, about carbon footprints. I have to share that data. In other fields, I'm not obliged to do that, but I can decide, and I can provide the rules how you can use my data in the end. And I can enforce it to a certain extent in the end, because we really want to build that up. So, and what is the most important aspect in there for me is the agreement. The agreement that I have between different stakeholders, between different other organizations. We agree on something, and then we can do the trusted data sharing based on claims. So to capture this, I started with a definition of data spaces, and we have an ISO standard that is close to be finalized. It will be published this year that defines the concepts and characteristics of data spaces. It's ISO IEC 2151. And the key characteristics of a data space is, and now you can check if you have a data space or not. The intention is to maintain control, to maintain control about your data, to establish trust between the different data space participants in the end, to provide means for the discoverability of data. Data catalogs, DCAT is a good technical starting point for that, but being open to other things as well. The availability of data sharing contracts and best case negotiation of data sharing contracts, and this includes open data. This is my offering. I have a license on top of that. And I don't negotiate. I don't want to have money for that. You can have it. I'm not negotiating that. So it's open to that as well. But it's really the fact that we need data sharing agreements, those contracts, and that we have the option to negotiate on that on various levels. We talk about the orchestration of data sharing, and that is really super important. We're not talking here about a data lake. We just pour in all our data and everyone has free access. That's not the idea. We orchestrate the data sharing. We have an agreement, and then I can provide information. This is the endpoint where you can consume the data from. Observability, if required, and interoperability as the key characteristics of data spaces, to really be able to switch from one participant to another as easy as possible in a given use case. What comes on top of that are those functional components, and they are really interesting. And some of them are better understood, others need some further research and development. Multi-level policies is something where we really need to work on in the future. I think it's clear to all of us that we have policies here from various levels. We talk about regulations that we need to take into account. The European data regulation needs to be taken into account, GDPR, things like this, but also industry rules. I'm in logistics, so we have typical rules or standards in logistics that we want to use, or each and every other domain. I have my internal organizational rules that I have to follow, and I have an agreement, a data sharing contract between two organizations that wish to interact with each other. Also, on another dimension, we talk about access to data catalogs, discoverability of data. Hey, I have weather data about the weather in Nijmegen today, for example. To let you know that is already some data, some information that I share. How accurate is this information? How can I assess it? Which time range does it cover? Does it include historical data? All those things. We have different levels of access to that until we get to the point, yes, we agree, and off you go with my data set. So this is an important thing that we need to structure more, especially also in the field of cross-border data sharing. We need to talk about semantic models, of course. So coming also back to linked data, we need to talk about semantics, about the understanding how things relate to each other. We need to talk about communication protocols, so how actually works that to ship data from A to B, and about general processes and rules, so how to organize all that stuff in the end. That's an overview that we have, and that is the common agreement. That is a data space, and you can implement it in the end in various ways. So this is a conceptual standard that helps you to provide some guidance, but it's nothing that you can give to a developer to implement that. So, but we have other documents for that. I would like to dive into a couple of those aspects. First thing I would like to start with is the topic of trust that I touched before. On the one hand side, we have policies, and policies exist on both ends. So not only on the data user side, also on the data provider side. The data provider might say, you may only use my data in Europe. So, and then I can provide a claim that, well, my organization, my data center is in Europe. And the claim is a technical thing. So a verifiable credential, for example, that I can exchange technically, but I need an evidence back for that. That's, for example, a paper document that states my head office is really in Europe. Also, in the other way around, a consumer might ask, so if you want to share data with me, it needs to be accurate. It needs to follow a certain degree of precision or whatever, a certain degree of data quality, and I can provide a claim as well for that. That's a very important topic, and I would only go briefly into that one. But we want to get there so that this works really automatically, that two machines can do that without human interaction, leaving a trace for a human, but without human interactions. And therefore, we have a new protocol that is a so-called decentralized claims protocol that does this automatically. We have issues with other known protocols for that. For example, the OpenID family that actually does exactly the same thing. But it has one very important issue, or two very important issues. If you want to use OpenID to exchange those claims, typically you need a human in the loop. You know, you're the one with your mobile scanning a QR code and saying, yes, that's allowed. That's the human variant. Or you have the so-called same device flow that you also use, for example, on your smartphone. If you have used your smartphone for that again, it's the same device and it's easily authenticated. So, but what happens if we're talking about a cloud environment? And really a huge amount of transactions. We don't want to have a human sitting there scanning QR codes the whole day, and we don't have the same device that does it all the time. We're talking about a cloud, and the idea of a cloud is that we get rid of the hardware and have virtual machines in the end that can move from data center to data center. So, and the decentralized claims protocol exactly fixes that issue. Of course, you can use other protocols as well. If you want to scan QR codes or you have the same machines in IoT, for example, there are other protocols possible as well. But this is a very important point that we need to resolve for scalable data spaces. The other important technical protocol is a data space protocol that captures one of the aspects with regards to interoperability that's not defined yet. So we have semantic standards, we have a lot of other technical standards that we can use, HTTP, for example, as a foundation for the data space protocol. But the key functionality about discoverability, where here it is used DCAT catalogs that are provisioned, that are exchanged and can be searched. For cataloging functionality, we use ODRL to express technical policies to do exactly this negotiation on policies and the matching afterwards between the claims and the policies. That's what in the data space protocol. And after we have agreed on a certain data sharing contract and agreement, then we can provide a resource. And this is happening on the so-called data plane. This is where we distinguish on the control plane, something that is reusable when organizations interact with each other, and then the data plane, where the actual work happens. So the control plane is a simple part, the data plane is a tough part, where you can really provide data, where you can use data, where you can connect data with each other and all these things. I've been talking a little bit on meaningful data and semantics. And this is really an important aspect and driver when we talk about data spaces, because we have meaningful data everywhere. We talk about metadata and the catalogs. That's already meaningful semantic data. I need to understand what's in there. How can I use it? Does it fit to my purpose? We talk about policies and claims. Also, a policy needs to be understandable, meaningful. I need to understand what that means. Likewise for a claim. So technically it's easy, just send a verifiable credential, but what's really the content of this verifiable credential? What does it mean, and really does it really fulfill the need in that policy? This is where we also really need clear semantics and a common understanding. And of course, also for the data itself, or the data products. The data product that we wish to share need to understand what's inside and how does it relate to other data sets that I might wish to consume or that I have in my own database already. And especially the term data products. This is something that is a very important term when we talk about Europe. In Europe, we have our data regulations. We have our new digital omnibus that provides a lot of more details and clarity on the data regulation in Europe. But I would like to briefly touch on the Data Act Article 33 that talks about data spaces. So we have a regulation in Europe that talks about data spaces and similar data sharing activities. So then how can you be compliant to the Data Act? And the Data Act is in force since September last year, so how can you be compliant to that? The Commission acknowledged that it's still unclear how to be compliant to the Data Act, and therefore a so-called standardization request was issued. The European Trusted Data Framework. A standardization request, briefly to explain, is when the Commission realizes we have a good regulation, but now we need some practical technical guidance how industry can implement that in the end. So this is a standardization request sent out to the European standardization organizations to come up or identify suitable standards that fulfill the needs of this regulation. Here we have a standardization request for the Data Act Article 33, the European Trusted Data Framework. And it includes 5 honestly, it includes 7 artifacts that shall be developed. It's a so-called trusted data transaction standard, and that's a multi-part standard, so it has 3 parts. We talk about a data governance standard for data space participants. So how can I, as a participant, organize my data governance and my data management, taking into account those standards that we have and the issues that come from the Data Act. We talk about a data catalog implementation framework, so DCAT-AP to be short on that. So we want to have a standard that guides us in the direction of DCAT-AP that is carried out by IDSA. And we need a semantic asset interoperability framework. This is also carried out by IDSA and reuses what we have achieved with SAREF in the SEMIC activities in the recent years. So this to be leveraged and coming up with a methodology how to build good semantic assets that can be used in databases for trusted data sharing. And we need a maturity model for the common European data spaces. So yes, you are a data space, but are you a mature data space or a less mature data space? So are you really flying and fully scalable, operational, or are you in your training shoes at the moment and testing something? So how can you assess that? Also to provide guidance to the data spaces, how to develop and what are the right angles to develop. And this is put, I think, nicely in this figure where those standards are really needed. On the left-hand side, yes, there is the idea how to build a data space. So we need a good governance for that. We need facilitating services for that. How can those be structured? And we need to mandate a certain amount of protocols so that our participants are really interoperable with each other. And then we have the interactions between the participants on the right-hand side, between the data holders and the data users, talking about discoverability of data, the data sharing agreements, and data access and usage then in the end. And of course, supporting also data intermediaries. So just imagine you're an SME and you're whatever, building screws. Well, maybe you're not that digitized and you need an intermediary, a supporting service that brings you into such a data space. That was taken into account when creating this standardization request. And I would like to briefly guide you through the key terms that you need to know about those standards. One of the key results is the so-called trusted data transaction. Trusted data transaction happen typically within a data space. You can also have a trusted data transaction without a data space, if that makes sense to you. However, it defines, and especially the part 1 of the trusted data transaction, defines the key concepts. It is important to know that the trusted data transaction are harmonized European norms, or to be harmonized European norms. That means if you're compliant to those standards, you're compliant to the regulation. This is an important measure to clearly show I am compliant to the regulation because I've implemented this as a standard. This helps you as an organization. So for part 1 on concepts, terminology and mechanisms, and there are 3 very important aspects in this figure that comes from the trusted data transaction part 1. The first one is on the upper left side. That is a data rights holder. That is a concept that does not exist all over the world. If you talk to my friends from Australia, they have no clue what we Europeans think about when we have a data rights holder. But the idea is very clear, and for most Europeans it is very clear. It's my data. I'm responsible. It's my data. I want to decide how this data shall be used. I have some rights, some IP rights, for example, on that data, and I would like to make sure that my data is used accordingly in the end. So, and the data rights holder is disconnected conceptually from the data producer. A very simple example. This is my watch. It produces data. Maybe some of you have also watches that produce data. So that's a data producer here. But I'm the data rights holder. So, and then it connects to my smartphone, to whatever kind of app. And then I have a data provider that is an organization that can share the data from my watch with someone else. But if I want to have that or not, that's my decision as the data rights holder. And this is an important connection that we need to make. This works easily in a personal environment. The same applies to industrial data, to whatever data you have in your organizations. That is a very important concept that we need to keep in mind, because exactly this consent part, if it's a person or it's an organization, we need to carry that over in every data transaction that we have. The other aspect is an interoperability. Capturing what I explained before, talking about publication and discoverability of data, negotiation of data sharing agreements and contracts, and then the actual data sharing and exchange in the end, and also the final bubble on the right, assess and usage of the data. Not only when it's in my data center, can you assess it and download it, Also, when it's in your data center, so you got a copy of my data, but you need to take into account the policies that are attached to that. So you need to carry that over the consent from the data rights holder. And the third important concept is the notion of the data product. That was a lengthy discussion, what to talk about and how to name it. We came up with a data product, and we have a very specific understanding of what a data product is. A data product can be understood in a very broad range. Because it's a product, so I need to consider, for example, marketing, service design, how to create a good service, a good data product that is useful for my community, for my customers. But that's not the key concept that we're talking here about in the standards when we talk about data products. When we talk about data product, it's always a combination of data with services and with metadata. Metadata as well, data about data again. And metadata can be very, very broad in the end. It nicely connects to data quality, which is a rabbit hole in itself to talk about data quality and the different dimensions and facets of data quality, which is a subject that is now coming in standardization. We expect a new European standardization request on data quality, but at the moment we focus on other aspects. When we talk about a data product, especially about the metadata, we talk about catalog information, so discoverability information. Can I understand the data? Can I find it? Can I understand if it's fit for purpose? I need to talk about semantic assets. Can I understand the data product in itself in the end? And we talk about the data sharing contracts. We talk about the management and the governance of the data rights, which is a very important thing. And this is captured in the standard on data governance and data management, taking into account that we really live in a multi-stakeholder environment here. As said, different organizations with different interests, but also different regulations that apply, especially when we talk about cross-border data sharing. With that, I think that sounds good. We can close our computers and off we go. Data spaces and trusted data sharing, that's all solved, and we can implement it, we can build it. Yes, we have open source components that can be used. Yes, we have closed source components, industrial offerings, connectors as a service that you can use. So off we go. Build data spaces and share data. After 10 years of IDSA, I think we can call it a day and close, but that's not the truth. I think there is still sufficient amount of work that needs to be done in various regions. And I have listed a couple of my thoughts, my burning points where I still ask for more work of the community, more development, more research in the future. And I think one of the most important points that we need to talk about is how do we create data products. So, of course, having meaningful, understandable, interoperable data products that are easily portable from one organization to the other, can be easily usable. Well, that's a job for me. I love that. I'm still a technical guy. But how can we assure that it's the right fit for purpose? So what kind of data is needed? At the moment we talk a lot about data that comes as a result of a process. I have a shipping, I have a supply chain. So I want to have data on that supply chain, on the process, because I want to do predictive maintenance of a machine, whatever. That's one aspect. The other aspect, we talk about data as part of a product, a digital product passport, a digital twin of something. That's super interesting and to share. And the fit for purpose is quite clear here, how to build that and how to shape that. Talk to people that are active in battery passports and digital product passports. It's not always that clear what kind of information needs to be attached to that and for which stakeholder. There is still a complexity and we need to work on that. Still, we are looking for this idea of the data economy. So how could a data product look like that comes out of my organization and looks cool to someone else? An organization that doesn't know that I even exist, but there's an interesting data product that I can use coming from a data marketplace or whatever. There is a lot of research and development required in the organizations and in research. Of course, taking into account availability and the control over the data. What am I willing to share and with whom under which conditions? We're still looking for business models. That was one of my initial slides. We talk a lot about innovation. Innovation, let's try out something fancy and new. But practically, what are the business models behind that? How can I really earn money? Regulation is a big driver here, so I need to comply to a regulation. That's a quick win. But what other business models do we really have? How can we make data space and trusted data sharing really sustainable, building the data economy? We struggle with, in general, with the digital maturity of organizations. We have a lot of organizations that are digital pioneers, that are completely digitized. Well, not all organizations are, and that's a journey that we need to take and where we need to support, especially also small and mid-sized organizations, to support that journey, give them the right tools to do so. And we are not yet really in this idea of a digital economy, of a data economy. Yes, we are looking in this direction, but what that really is and how it works, what some new business models are, I'm curious to see that, and I hope that I see that before I retire. Craig? So I see some people share this thought as well. And then we need tools. So we have a couple of open source developments, that's true. For example, the Eclipse data space components is really a hardened stack for developers to build such tools. We have other organizations building those tools, again, TNO. One of the key drivers here, we are having their own implementations to support you in connecting to data spaces, and a lot of others that do already. But we need tools in open source, but also in closed source, to really come up with the right tools that can make you connect to data spaces. But also methodological approaches. So how do I do that? I need some guidance. How do I need to reshape my organization? What kind of role do I need there? How do I connect the different departments, the different expertise to each other? We need the right methods for that. Available, also suitable for small and mid-sized organizations, but also for larger organizations. We need to understand better this idea of shared governance in such a multilateral environment. The rule books. What do we need to put in such a rule book and what not? What is left open for every participant to agree on, and what do we need to put together? We see that development in the different data spaces, and everyone is struggling with that. Coming up with an over-complex and over-detailed rulebook, or saying, well, just do what you want. I'm here for you to support. Something in between. So this is where we really need to understand and learn a little bit how this new structure of collaborating really works. We need education, and this comes very close to the other aspect that I mentioned before, talking about the creation of data products, about business models, about tooling. We need education. People need to understand how it actually works, what is the technology behind that, how can I apply that technology, what works and what doesn't work. We need this societal shift to understand really the value in the data and what kind of data can really help my organization if it's shared, and what do I need to protect. This requires organization so that we have the right decision makers in the future and the right people that can implement those decisions in the end. And well, in the end, we need to apply the regulations that we have. Especially in Europe, we have a strong data regulation. We need to learn how this can be applied, how we can put this into practice, including the discussion that we have all over Europe, all over the world on the aspects of digital sovereignty. What does this mean for me as an organization? How to understand digital sovereignty for me as an organization? How to understand this for us as Europe, which is very closely connected also to the topic of data spaces. So I hope this is a sufficient amount of food for thoughts for you. Thanks a lot.
Well, thank you, Sebastian. I was a little bit worried that you wouldn't name it data sovereignty. In earlier data spaces presentations, you often call it, every 3 sentences the word data sovereignty was mentioned, and now it was your final bullet on your list. It was your first time you mentioned the word. So is there a reason for that, or is it just by accident?
Well, there is definitely a reason for that, and also an accident. So I have this nice slide that I also was tempted to put inside. I agreed to data sovereignty because that's really the catchy term that we've been talking about for 10 years. I want to be the sovereign of my data. I'm the one who decides how my data is used. And that was really a term that we used a lot, sovereignty, when we started with data space. It's catchy and everyone understands. Without having the clear need to explain what it actually means, because this differs a little bit. I'm happy that today I can express this much better, what data sovereignty really means. What are the exact points, the technical points, but also the governance aspects, the operational business aspects that touch on data sovereignty in the end. So, and it has been broadened to digital sovereignty, so this is also something like a little bit of political touch more. And sovereignty is really, and this is a key learning from me, it's differently understood when you talk to different people. Go and talk to the French guys about sovereignty. That includes always chopping up heads. In Germany, we are a little bit more easier on that. So it's
chopping off heads.
Yes, also with that.
Well, actually, I'm really happy that you don't use the word anymore, because I really hate to pronounce the word. And actually, in Dutch, if you try to translate it to Dutch, the word soevereiniteit, but then people are also thinking about the royal thing.
Monarchy,
monarchy kind of thing. So it's, I'm happy that you didn't use it. Are there any questions for the room?
Hello, I'm Sam Oppenlaus. I'm co-holder of the Nijmegen project. I'm a professor next to Erwin in Mechanics Data and Knowledge Engineering at Hull University of Applied Sciences. It's really a follow-up. Erwin said, okay, you didn't mention data sovereignty a lot. The other one associated a lot with data spaces is federative data spaces, federative systems, etc. Just say a few words. Is that still a key thing, or because I didn't see it combined in your presentation, so it's just a follow-up on Erwin.
Yeah, that's a good question. So you never heard me saying a lot about federation. That's not my piece of cake, but it's a very important term. You're right. We talk a lot about the federations and federation services as well. That's an important term. However, we have some very interesting challenges in data spaces. So for scalability, but also on this sovereignty part. So who decides and whom can I trust, and what should be given to a state authority and what can be organized in industry. So, and therefore we come from centralized infrastructures, and identity is a very good example for that. There is a state that gives you an identity as a person at least. Also for an organization it provides something like an identity, an identifier. What is good enough? But especially when we talk about other kind of claims, we want to go more in a more decentralized way. And then the question is, how can we do that in a more decentralized way? Fully decentralized works, and especially when I talk about one single data space, that works nicely to be decentralized. However, what do you do when you want to federate two different data spaces? How do you do that? Well, I'm a researcher by heart, so this is just for the reader as an exercise to come up with that, because in theory, if the systems, the rule books are interoperable with each other, I don't need to deal with that. Practically, at least for the next couple of years, we will need something that does this federation, that connects the different fields of data spaces with each other. This is where I really see a need for such federation and federating services. The other aspect where we see that a lot is in, for example, for data catalogs as a federation service. I have a data catalog that I offer to my data space. Well, I would love to do that, to become rich and famous, because that's a business model that we're mandating here. We need one single authority that federates all the different data sources from everyone. That's a very clear mandate to a business model. I think it's important that we have that in some areas where this is really needed, because we have different degrees of digital maturity, because we have very loosely connected partners there. So there we need such federation systems, but not everywhere. So and therefore I think it's really a touchy topic, because you can easily mandate a business model inside that, or you can close this open innovation cycle too much. I think it's important and something to work on, but I said I'm careful with federations and federation services for that reason, like I'm careful today with the sovereignty term.
Okay.
Excellent, thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Another question? Probably it's the final question.
Hi, Javier Ferreira from Sebastian Steinbuss. I have a question because perhaps somebody has already asked you before, but in previous releases of the architecture, I saw one component that it was the marketplace. Like, and I haven't seen it in the latest ones that you were having.
Yeah.
Why is that for, and how do you see the servitization of data? So a company handling the data and giving you a service, because at the moment it's like, it's changed between two parties, right? But is it still, are you still considering a third party that might operate your data and provide you an extra service?
Absolutely. So, and I need to distinguish here. So practically speaking, of course, we need marketplaces. And I didn't mention it because we put it somewhere, we buried it under optional services. What it is, because not each and every data space requires a marketplace. Sometimes you have a very clear, whatever, supply chain scenario where you don't need a marketplace, you know whom to connect with, or under what you are searching for, you don't need a marketplace for that. In other fields, yes, we are looking for that, and we really want to build that up. However, the complex thing is, how do you standardize a marketplace for all fields that you have, for all different sectors and domains? That's challenging. So this is where it's not in the standardization path, but it's really an enabling and a facilitating service that could be used, not in each sector, but in some sectors. And then taking into account that we have marketplace services defined somewhere. For example, in the telco field, we have the TM Forum APIs that perfectly define a marketplace that you can use. So you have a specification, a standard for that you can use, at least in the field of telcos. Does it fit to your domain, to your sector? I don't know. So this is highly specific, and we have existing things. So yes, we need marketplaces in the future. That's an important measure. Also, to come back to that slide, talking about SMEs, and marketplace for me is not only that, well, I have my Amazon for data products, it also should come with some supporting services, like whatever marketing, community building, providing good contracts, for example, to share data, providing a reliable frame contract to monetize data, all those things. I would see that under marketplaces. As said, not a standardization topic in itself, but for the adoption, for the implementation. That is an important functionality depending on your use case.
Okay, thank you. I think we can continue discussion for quite some time. I have some questions about this, what you call semantic assets implementation framework.
Yeah.
I'm not sure what it is, but
sounds good.
Sounds good. Maybe that's for the break, and also the open source components. I know we have some people, especially the right side of the room, that have some implementations already done, and yeah, also looking forward to hear more about that. But also for the break or the drinks after. So thanks a lot, Sebastian, for your talk.
Thanks a lot.